Hey, good morning. Welcome to Redwood Church. We are so glad that you've joined us on this Labor Day weekend. It's Sunday of Labor Day weekend, and Labor Day is kind of the official end of summer. And although the official beginning of fall is still a few weeks away, it is kind of that dividing point for us that has always marked the end of summer, the beginning of fall, the beginning of the school year. And again, a lot of students have already been in school for a month. We are actually in full disclosure. This is a pre-recorded sermon, with it being Labor Day weekend. Shannon, Zach, and I are spending some time together this weekend, and so I say that because as we are recording this, Idalia, the hurricane, has made its way through Florida and Georgia and off the coast of South Carolina, and hopefully is safely out to sea. But as we're recording this, we know that there's been tremendous storm surge. There's been a lot of power outages. There have been a lot of people with a lot of property damage. And so we don't know the full extent of the damage, the devastation. So far, I've not heard about significant numbers of loss of life. And so we're praying for all those who are in the storm's path. We hope that all those who were hunkered down will be found safely. And although it has been devastating, we hope that those in its path will recover quickly. And I know that there will be people that will go to help them recover. And certainly we are praying for all of those. But just wanted full disclosure because I won't know, we won't know exactly what's happened for several days yet. And so as we're joining together this morning on Labor Day weekend, and I try each year on Labor Day weekend to find some kind of new angle or a fresh way to look at this whole idea of work and labor. And Labor Day weekend Labor Day is a day when we celebrate the American worker. And when we think about the American worker, we're really thinking about people who work with their hands, who have built this country. And so those who do jobs that are often very difficult, very physically demanding. And so we pause and we have into the summer cookouts, and we grill out, and we go to the pool one last time, and we have all of these traditions that mark that day. But much like on Memorial Day, we remember those who have lost their lives in service to our country. We really do need to pause on Labor Day weekend and give thanks for those who have in many ways built our country and who still build our communities in our country, who support us in so many ways. And so this morning I want to talk a little bit about what that means and how we as Christians view work and view those who work around us, and particularly those who do work that benefits us tremendously. And so I'm going to read from some verses from 1 Thessalonians. I'm going to read from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 through 12, and then out of chapter 5, I'm going to read verses 12 and 13. And so I'll begin reading that for us now, beginning in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 9. Now, concerning love of brothers and sisters, you do not need to have anyone write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. And indeed, you do love all the brothers and sisters throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, beloved, to do so more, to aspire to live quietly, to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands as we directed you, so that you may behave properly toward outsiders and be dependent on no one. We also appeal to you, brothers and sisters, to respect those who labor among you and have charge of you in the Lord and admonish you. Esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Be at peace among yourselves. So think about work, and I think I've shared this with you in previous Labor Day sermons. I think about my own work in my life. And my earliest recollection of doing work was at 12 or 13 years old, and I was able to take a lawnmower and clean it up. And I wasn't really good at maintaining it. I think I probably either paid or my parents paid to have it maintained and have it tuned up. But I began mowing grass to earn money when I wanted things. And so very early on, my concept of work was very much that I complete a task for someone else, a task that has some kind of value, and at the end of that task, I would be paid for completing that task, and I could use the income from that. I could use those resources, that money that I earned from doing that task, to buy something. It was a very simple understanding of work, to have a job, to have a task. And so that was what I did. And then by the time I was 15, I had a job that was kind of a jack of all trades, working for a law firm on the weekends. And I would mow grass there. I would clean up. I would file. I would answer the phone because I worked for them also some in the summer. And so I completed a variety of tasks and across that. But and I began to understand a little bit of the meaning of work, and that I began to understand how a law firm operated just by the tasks that I was asked to do. Once I got my driver's license, I was asked at times to go file documents at the courthouse because I could drive and I could go do that. And so began to understand how that practice operated and how that contributed to the good of others. And then, I had more kind of jobs, more tasks. I worked at Stone Mountain Park, cutting out wood on a scroll saw. It was called the old woodcutter. And I worked with my hands and I learned a skill. And it was a lot of fun and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed interacting with the people at the park. Later, I worked for Stone Mountain Park in training and in cash control, and learned about finances and how all that money was managed. I worked in sales at Rich's department store in both small electronics and men's clothing. And so I had all of these various jobs. Now, when I was 5 years old, as I'm sure I've shared with you many times, I stood up and said I want to be an architect, an artist, and a part-time singer. I've told you that the singing didn't work out. Many of you who know me well know that did not work out. Not much of an artist, and it turns out I wasn't much of an architect. And so here we are this morning. But over time, I began to understand that there were things that I thought that I was created to do, but it was more stuff that I wanted to do. It was concepts and ideas that I appreciated and respected, but didn't necessarily have the innate talent to do myself. And so what I began to figure out what I realized is I had to figure out what I was called and created to do. And that's really what we're getting into this morning as Paul writes to the church in Thessalonica. And I love how he does this. It's interesting if you were paying attention as I was reading the text this morning. He says, "Now look, I know that you don't have to have anybody to write to you to explain to you what it means to love one another, because you've already been taught by God to love one another." And so he says he doesn't have to write to them to tell them that, but then he tells them that because he knows that they do need to be reminded of that. And he uses that device several times in this letter. I know no one needs to write to you to tell you this because you already do this. So it's this idea of kind of being not passive, but certainly trying to be non-confrontational and reminding them how they need to live. But there's these three admonitions: to live quietly, mind your own affairs, and work with your hands. And we hear these so that's all the time. We talk a lot about so that's. And the reason you do those things so that you can behave properly toward outsiders, so you can show Christian love and Christian hospitality to those who may or may not be Christian, who may or may not be part of your community, and so that you're not dependent on anyone, that you're self-sufficient, that if you can live quietly, mind your own affairs, and work with your hands. Now, we always have to remind ourselves that we have to be careful taking things out of context and understand that yes, we're called to live, that Paul's admonishing them, encouraging them to live quietly, but that doesn't mean that we live in seclusion or isolation. What it means is to have the humility. If we read it in the context of all the other parts of the Bible, I believe what Paul is really saying here is let's live with humility. And mind your own affairs is don't gossip. Don't always don't always have the need to stick your nose into other people's affairs and businesses, but take care of your own business, to mind your own business, to be sure that you are taking care of yourself first. Now, I think about building on last week when we were in Romans, and I thought that Shannon was laughing as I was preaching last week because she knew the example I was going to give. But remember in Romans 12 last week, verse 3, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." And so this is really a continuation of these past couple of weeks when we were talking about the golden rule, when we reminded ourselves last week that we need to be humble. We need to not think too much of ourselves, that we are reminded that all the gifts that we possess are God-given gifts. And the things that we can only do because God gave us the gifts to do those tasks. And so Paul kind of begins to describe this in this verse. And then if we kick over to that verse I read from chapter 5, but we appeal to you, brothers and sisters, we also appeal to you to respect those who labor among you and have charge of you in the Lord and admonish you, esteem them very highly because of the work. Now, again, full disclosure, what Paul's really talking about here is talking about those who labor among you within the community of faith. So those who are working in and with the church, the ecclesia, the gathered body. But I think that this translates very appropriately, and I think Paul would say it's not just about respecting those who labor among us within the church community, but it's really respecting those who labor among us in the broader community, because he talks about that in chapter 4. And he's esteemed them very highly because of their work. And we live in a country that I think that one of the mistakes we've made in the last 50 years, so in my lifetime, we have devalued skilled labor. We have devalued people who work with their hands, people who have professions in which they are responsible for the various trades that help make our world go. This summer, in this past few months, as I've gone to boot camp, I haven't gone as frequently as I should. I've missed quite a lot. But when I've gone to boot camp, those of you who know about my boot camp know that those folks are like family to me. And we meet at Peachtree Battle Shopping Center. And there is a brand new building going up at Peachtree Battle, just north of Peachtree Battle Shopping Center, that northeast corner of Peachtree Battle Shopping Center. And it's a mid-rise. What I've noticed every morning is the workers, the skilled workers, the laborers, the construction crews, the carpenters, the riggers, all of those people who work on a construction site. They're all showing up to work. They're all beginning to get there about the time we begin to work out. So we gather around 5 till 6 o'clock. And we go various directions from that parking lot. We'll go north on Peachtree. We'll go out Peachtree Battle. For those who are familiar with it, and those of you who aren't from Atlanta, it's just various running paths that we take that all circle back to this shopping center that's right on Peachtree Road. And so they're not allowed to park in the parking lot at Peachtree Battle, and so there's other places that they can park. During the summer, they were allowed to park at the school. They've parked along the street on Peachtree Battle. There's other parking lots that have been set aside for them. But every morning you see them, and they're coming in with all of their tools, their tool belt, their hard hat. They have on long sleeves and long pants, and they're carrying their lunch bags, and they're carrying fluids to keep them hydrated throughout the day. And every single morning that I've gone, and every single time I've seen them, I think about the fact that they generally go unnoticed. Most people are not up at 6 o'clock in the morning. By the time that most people get out and about, all of those men and women are already in that building. And you may hear the banging and you may hear the sounds of the construction, but they kind of disappear into the steel and the concrete and the glass. And you can't see them. You can see what's being built, but you can't see their faces and their hands and the work of their hands. And really this Labor Day, I wanted the message to be for us twofold. One is that we are called to discover our own vocation. So let me do this real quick. Think about work, and you think about what I started with, is that for most of us, our earliest understanding of work is that we do a job, we complete a task, we're paid for that, and that allows us to buy things that we either need or want. And so there's a job. And then there's other words that describe it: career, profession, occupation, vocation. There's a tendency within our culture to more highly value those who have very specific skill sets, who have advanced degrees, who have bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. And I'm very fortunate to have earned those types of degrees. And there are people who respect me because I have earned these degrees and I have a vocation in which I've been called to serve other people. And I fall short of that almost every single day, but I'm very well aware that there are people who, before they even know me, have respect for me because of those degrees I've earned and the vocation that I have followed through my calling. But I think we need to get back to the point where we understand that it's not just doctors and lawyers and pastors and preachers and clergy and those who have these professional designations. I found this wonderful article on the Institute of Faith, Work, and Economics, and it's written by a woman named Judy Allen, and she's quoting broadly from a book by Stephen Garber called The Seamless Life, A Tapestry of Love and Learning, Worship, and Work. And in this book, Garber talks a lot about his grandfather. His grandfather was a cattle rancher, and he remembers as a young boy, 10 years old, going to work with his grandfather and watching his grandfather at work. And he talks about how respected his grandfather was by his workers, by the community. And he quotes this, and apparently this is in his book. He says that his grandfather lived a coherent life in which what he believed about God and the world was worked out in the way he lived in the world. And I would add, worked in the world. And he quotes this too: watching him live his life first awakened Garber to the reality that life was more than labor, that vocation was more than occupation, but also that the work we do matters. It matters very much. In another place I read, it talked about when our vocation comes out of our occupation, or our occupation leads to our vocation. And the way I would define that would be this way: occupation becomes vocation when we experience a sense of call. And I believe that people can be just as called to be carpenters and plumbers and electricians and ranchers and farmers and all of these other vital things that we need in our society to make our society go, to make our communities what they are. And we need to rediscover a sense of call, not to just these academic titles and these professions that require these degrees, but we need to rediscover a sense of appreciation and respect for those who do the tasks that many of us would not really want to do. In the past few weeks, I think I shared with you, we had a tree fall in our house. We've had a situation in the family that's required a lot of attention. And again, as I think I shared, we're all well and we're working through that. But I've over the past few weeks, it has been, for those of you in Atlanta, you know this. For those of you beyond Atlanta, you've read about it, seen it, and I think most of the country has experienced this. It has been hot. It's been temperatures in the high 90s and dew points in the mid 70s, which means that most days the temperature it feels like outside is well over 100 degrees. There have been days where the heat index was 105, 110 degrees. And so even though we've had some people take away the tree, there was still a lot of debris that needed to be cleaned up, and there were holly bushes that were damaged and other debris that needed to be collected. And so there were days I had to get outside in the heat of the day with tools. In fact, I've got a scratch on my arm where I wasn't safe with my risk manager sitting over here managing the recording this morning. I cut myself with a saw. I mean, and this was just a few hours at a time. I would come in, I was dehydrated, I was tired, I was exhausted, I had a headache. And in that moment, I realized that most of my work, even though I believe I'm in vocation because I feel deeply called to the work I do, most of the work that I do through my vocation is sitting at a desk, researching sermons. It's riding in an air-conditioned car to go to the hospital to visit someone, sitting somewhere and talking to someone on the phone, having a prayer with them. Most of what I do is very comfortable. It may be mentally taxing. Sometimes it's emotionally challenging, but physically it's not very demanding most of the time. And I'm very well aware that there are so many among us for whom 5 or 6 days a week, the work to which they have been called, or the work that they have found to do, or the work that they find necessary to make ends meet, is work that is very physically demanding and leaves them exhausted. And so on this Labor Day weekend, on this Labor Day, I want us to pause and give thanks for men and women who serve us in such incredible ways. And I want us to rediscover a sense of appreciation and respect for those who do those jobs, who complete those tasks. And I call on all of us to have a higher sense of respect for those jobs and honor for those jobs that are so necessary. We need to encourage young men and women who don't necessarily want to go to college to say it's okay. There are so many other ways for you to find a vocation, a job, something that you enjoy and love to do that can become your calling as you seek to serve your brothers and sisters, which is what Paul is admonishing us to do. That part of us loving one another is to find work that honors God and honor God through our work. Will you pray with me? Almighty God, on this Labor Day weekend, we do thank you for the American worker. And we thank you, quite frankly, for those who work around the world, for we are such a global economy, and so much of what we have comes from other places in the world. So for all of those who work to create and manufacture the things and services we use, we give you thanks. Oh God, on this weekend, we also remember all of those who were in the path of Hurricane Idalia. We pray for the safety of those who were in its path. We pray for recovery as people dig out from the damage that was created by wind and rain and storm surge. And God, may all of us find ways that we might be able to help them recover and rebuild in the midst of such devastation. And God, we thank you for the summer that we've had. We look forward toward the fall and all that you have in store. Bless us this day and throughout the rest of this week. For we offer ourselves in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. So glad to be with you this morning. I hope you're having a wonderful Labor Day weekend, and we'll have a nice holiday tomorrow. Hope that you will stay connected with us throughout the week on our social media at RedwoodATL, on our website at redwoodchurchatl.org. If you would like to contribute to the mission and ministry of Redwood Church, you can do so by going to redwoodchurchatl.org/give or texting Redwood Church to the number on your screen. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a great week. God bless. Take care.